I might tell you some funny Steve Jobs stories if you want in a while, I don't know. Or we go down the time machine scenario where a whole bunch of people are made obsolete and the species splits in two. And hackers like me who get to have gigs close to the key, rich servers survive, and then other people just kind of, whatever happens, I don't know what happens to you all. That's a really crappy one. And then the other one is to continue the social contract that we discovered that got us as far as we've gone so far, where we keep on making better and better jobs where people can define themselves and make their own way based on their hearts and minds. And the curious thing about this, the historical quirk that's little known, is that if you go back to 1960, when we have the first technical description of how something like the internet could work, how something like the web could work, it actually included exactly this solution, because at the time it still felt obvious to people that that's the way you have a sustainable definition of technology in society. And I'm talking, of course, about Ted Nelson's Xanadu. So Ted Nelson was the first person to articulate that you could make new kinds of media out of digital technologies. And he had this notion that, it's interesting, it might sound alien to you, but first of all, there's no cut, copy, paste in any computer. Those things just aren't implemented. Instead, each body of information, like a melody or a picture or whatever, exists only once from a logical point of view, in the same way that an app in an app store exists only once from a logical point of view. There might be copies as an engineering matter to make it go fast, but there's just one. And then anytime you access it, you pay for it. But if you build a compound thing using other people's stuff, there's a way that micropayments accrue to everybody involved in the chain. And it's a really interesting idea where there's only one store, so there's not an Apple and an Amazon, but there's one universal store, just like there's only one currency and one army for a country or something. And everybody can contribute, everybody's both buyer and seller, and people can define themselves. And that was the origin idea. And the way it was killed was really interesting. It was campus Maoists who used to storm the stage and yell at Ted. I remember this so clearly, saying, "We will use digital technology to," and this, you're not going to believe me, but this is what they said, "to starve the beast." So lately, starve the beast is a term associated with the Tea Party and other conservative elements in the US, with the idea that you bankrupt the government so that it just has to get small and it becomes what you want, which is some little time. It's interesting, like Lincoln spoke in this room, so this is so relevant. You sort of reverse the Civil War a little bit. The federal government isn't big enough anymore to sort of enforce some sort of larger idea on some place that wants to be provincial. Is that unfair? I don't know, it might be, but at any rate, but at that time, starve the beast was a phrase associated with these leftists, and they were saying, we will not have money in the virtual world. The whole idea of digital information from our point of view is to starve capitalism by making stuff free. And there's a whole history to that I could go into a little bit more if you like in question time, but Ted lost. I mean, basically what happened is a combination of people with other ideologies, mostly from the left, a little bit from the right too, sort of changed the structure of the internet, brought in cut, copy, paste, brought in, and you have to understand, this is something I try to explain in the book, the very idea of the document, the file that you can copy and move around, actually isn't necessary and wasn't part of a lot of the earlier architectures. Instead, you just had this global file with all these nodes that each had only one instance. They were concatenated together to create the illusion of a file at any time you wanted to see one. This might be hard for you to see because we've gone down such a different path, but if you can step back and think about it, it's actually no different, no harder than what we have. It's just that we've become so used to and so ingrained with the architecture we ended up with that we can't imagine anything could ever be different. But it can, and it really must. So at some point, the better the machines get, the more digital architecture determines what our lives are like, the more it determines who has power, how power is shared between people, the more it determines how much freedom people have, how much power of self-definition people have. So the power of digital technology today is probably not as great as various other things in the world, but it'll keep on gaining and gaining and gaining the more the machines improve. Machines of all kinds, not just computers. So we must improve digital architecture. We must humanize it. And in particular, we have to learn to see beyond the fads. The fads cut so thick. It's so hard. Right now, the narrative is, people on the other side of the world overthrow a dictator, and what do we see? We see Twitter and Facebook. We see ourselves. We see narcissistically our own little companies. We see just California and Egypt and Tunisia. And we have to cut through that. It doesn't mean that we have to utterly condemn it. There are a lot of very good things about those tools, and I'm not condemning them in full at all. But we have to see through the narcissism of our time. We have to see that we are neither steam engine nor Twitter. We're spy submarines. Okay, so with that,